All right, friends, back again with the Subaru Impreza. Today I have out on this little table a few things from the engine bay. I've taken them out primarily to pass visual inspection for California smog certification. And, these things, when they're in the engine bay, they make it look kind of like, oh, it's a modified car or whatever. It's a naturally aspirated CVT Impreza, 2-liter. Come on. But, a lot of people, because the car is what it is, a lot of people want to make it more performant, right? And how do they do that? Oh, like cold air intake and an exhaust, and it'll be like so much faster. But it's not, right? The OEM intake pulls in pretty close to the same amount of air, at least for daily driving purposes. You're never going to feel the difference between a cold air intake with a high flow filter. The only time you're really going to feel these two in combination with the engine is when you're in the higher RPMs, like 4,000 and above, right? When it's really pulling in a lot of air. Typical street driving, you're just going to be pulling in, half as much horsepower as you really need. 75 horsepower is enough to get you rolling and like accelerating through a traffic light, like really easy, right? Only when you're stepping on the gas on the freeway and just like burning 100 miles per hour or something, that's when these larger intakes and better flowing filters do anything, right? Same goes for your headers and your exhaust. You're not utilizing that full potential until like the higher RPM. So for daily driving, you don't need a high flow filter. OEM one's fine. You don't need a cold air intake. OEM one's fine. I've been driving this thing for the last couple of weeks with just the OEM intake. I do have power blocks still in there, and I put the original tune back on, and I'm surprised. The car feels great. Like, I like driving the car, even with the original tune and those larger primary headers. Still works fine. These things, what is this? This is Jason's DIY catch can. It's basically a hollowed out catch can. I've removed the brass filter, the particulate filter. It's way too restrictive for letting air flow through here, all the way back out to here. And that goes into the intake bung here, right? Typically, you're going to see an intake bung on aftermarket intakes. That usually allows the breather or the crankcase ventilation to flow back into the intake and then into the intake manifold. So the air oil separator, do I need it? I really don't, but it's a reliability thing. This is also a reliability thing because the OEM intake has a baffle box to catch oil, kind of. So this just replaces it for this intake pipe. Why would you want to use something like this as an intake? It looks cool. It makes cool sounds. The diameter of this thing is the same as the OEM one, which is 68 millimeters inner diameter, and that's what you kind of want to go for when you're getting an aftermarket cold air intake. Is something very similar to the size of the throttle body. If you go up to like a 3.6 liter intake tube or like a 3 liter H6 horizontal 6 motor intake tube, it's going to mess up the flow through the MAF sensor, the mass airflow sensor. It's going to think, the velocity of air is not enough. It's going to start throwing codes, things like that, right? So the idea is to get high velocity through this intake pipe and lots of, volume, right? But if you're sacrificing the intake velocity with a larger volume, then your little 2 liter or 2.5 liter engine's not going to be too happy, right? So stick with this 68 millimeter inner diameter pipe or something around like at most 70 millimeter, because once you go up from there, you're going to have very like low torque and things like that. So more flow, yeah, but again, you're going to have to get into those super high RPMs to even realize any of that. I've had these things in my car for 3 or 4 years now, and I just pulled them out just for smog certification, and I've been driving the car around like this, blasting the FB20 in its comical range, right? And the car still feels pretty close to what it is with this stuff on. I think the biggest thing that changes these cars, to be honest, is in terms of power, is a tune, right? You can use basically all the stock intake and exhaust and have an aftermarket tune. I'm not talking about just like a like an off-the-shelf tune. I'm talking about like one of those ones that is a little bit more aggressive, maybe stage 1.5 or stage 2-ish kind of tunes. Granted, none of the engine is built. It's a stock engine, so an aggressive ECU tune will actually bring out the most, because the car from the factory, it's tuned for economy, right? Like gas savings and just ease of driving, right? Once you start getting into those aftermarket tunes, you're not going to get that much more horsepower, but maybe like 8 to 10 horsepower, 15 at most with some bolt-ons with the exhaust and stuff. But most of the gains that you get from the e-tunes are going to come in terms of low-end torque or torque availability through the rev range, right? So yeah, this stuff, I'll put it back in later. Yeah, honestly, like only for the high revs you're going to need this stuff, is reliability and a little bit more flow on the top end. But for everyday driving, that OEM stuff is just great. So hope everyone's tuning their cars still and enjoying their Subarus. Have a good day.